book of Acts just has Paul getting arrested. Scholars think that Paul got arrested in sometime in the 60s and was in Rome. And so, which would mean that the book of Acts ends with Paul being in prison. This next one, I think he's a Muslim, so it should be very interesting.
Mark, Luke, and John, who were they? Matthew who? Mark who? Luke who? And John who? What were their last names? When did they write? Did they know Jesus Christ? Did they walk with Jesus Christ? Did they eat with Jesus Christ? Did they talk with Jesus Christ? Did they even meet Jesus Christ? The answer is no, 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 no. Conclusively. The earliest of them that wrote 40 years after Jesus Christ, so they never met him. The last of them wrote 80 years after Jesus Christ, never met him. And the church fathers and the church writers and the Christian historians, they all agree that perhaps those four writers themselves were only pen names.
I want to read a passage for you guys, just so we're clear on this. This is out of 1 John. Just to answer your questions. That which was from the beginning, that goes back to John 1:1. That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked upon, and we have touched with our hands concerning the word of life. The life was made manifest, and we have seen it and testified to it and proclaim to you the eternal life which was with the Father and was made manifest to us. That which we have seen and heard, we proclaim also to you, so that you too may have fellowship with us. And indeed, our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. So, now, with all that said, there ought to be some comments about dating. It is commonly thought in regards to dating, because he said 40 years, 80 years after. I don't know what he's talking about 80 years after. That's a weird dating. Even a later dating of the Gospel of John puts it in 90-95 AD. And that's 65 years later, not 80. So he really doesn't know what he's talking about. A lot of people think the book of Acts was written prior to the fall of Jerusalem, because the fall of Jerusalem is prophesied about in the Gospel of Luke and happens in 70 AD, but let's say 67 to 70 AD, because there's a siege. And that if it had come to pass, if this book, the book of Acts, was written after that event, then Luke would have mentioned how Jesus' prophecy had been fulfilled. But Luke leaves that empty. I mean, the book of Acts just has Paul getting arrested. Scholars think that Paul got arrested in sometime in the 60s and was in Rome. And so, which would mean that the book of Acts ends with Paul being in prison. Remember, he's not dead, which is in the 60s. So if the book of Acts is written in the 60s, that presumes, say, let's just be generous and say mid-60s, right? Early to mid-60s. That would mean that the Gospel of Luke was written before that, which would put it, say, in the late 50s, mid to late 50s. Scholars also believe that Luke very clearly uses Matthew and Mark as a source, which means Mark and Luke are written beforehand. So sometimes in the 50s, maybe late 40s, which is not 40 years after Jesus' death. This guy has no idea what he's talking about. Very clearly, he has no idea what he's talking about. And so, but this is the sort of stuff, right? Like people listen, they're like, oh man, yeah, we don't know who wrote this stuff. You hear sometimes silly things like John is not a Hebrew name. Luke is not a Hebrew name. What were their names? I'm just like, oh gosh, you guys can't be serious about this stuff. You can't actually think that's a valid argument, but people repeat it. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry that people watch this stuff and they think these things are somehow reliable information. That's easy pickings, by the way. It really is easy pickings. But people hear it. Zakir Naik says a lot of random stuff. people listen to Zakir Naik quite a bit and try to use Zakir Naik's apologetic against Christians. And so if you don't know what's going on, you're going to have a hard time with some of this stuff.